What's up, duelists? This is Josh, and I'm finally back from YCS Lille. And if you've been following me on Twitter, where I always post updates about my YCS performances and tournament runs, you already know I ended up going 8-3, losing the last round to Swiss, which unfortunately ended up with me not making it into the top 32. I played Labyrinth, so I still wanted to make a little video on why I chose that deck and show you the list that I played. I do think it was a honestly pretty good decision. I don't regret it at all. The reason I played it, first of all, was because it was a relatively frustrating format to prepare for, I feel like, because of what kind of powerful boards the yugioh deck makes, paired with how good it can play through hand traps because of Spirit of Yugioh. You can't really board break it, but you also can't really hand trap it. So like the only real card that I could think of was Sphere Mode to beat it, which was a card that I main decked in the Labyrinth deck. At the same time, there's like a lot of other decks in the format. It's not just yugioh. Shifter decks, including Tenpai and Ritual Beast. Snake Eyes was something to be expected. Runic White Forest. A lot of different stuff going on in the format. So I wanted a deck that had a solid chance at beating yugioh when it went second. And for that, I wanted it to be a deck that can use Sphere Mode. But it also needed to be a deck, in my opinion, that needed to be fine into something like Dimensional Shifter and Mulcharmi Perulia, which I anticipated to be in everyone's decks, especially the Tenpai decks. Yeah, Labyrinth was the only deck in my mind that checked all of those boxes. So last week, before the YCS, I extensively worked on a Labyrinth deck. And at this point, I want to give a huge shout out to Pack, who was like up for some testing and gave me a lot of input into the deck. And yeah, once again, huge shout out to Pack for helping me come up with the list. I did think it was working quite well for me. I did beat every single yugioh I faced in the 11 rounds of Swiss, which was 3. I faced 4 Tenpais and I beat 3 of them. So I think it beats the 2 most represented decks in the format quite well. I did lose to 2 Snake Eyes, which was a risk that I was willing to take. That was a matchup that I was less prepared for. It's not unwinnable, but the deck is significantly better into Tenpai and yugioh. I think this deck performs quite well in this format. Also, specifically, if you're trying to look for a budget option. There is going to be Mulcharmi Perulia in my side deck, but that is not mandatory. And outside of that, I'm pretty sure there is not any card in my deck that is expensive. I'm not the best with card prices, but I don't think there's anything here that's like more than $5. So if you're looking for a budget alternative that can definitely compete with yugioh and Tenpai in this format, I think this is something you might want to look into. The monster lineup, it is a trap lab build. So literally the only Labyrinth monsters you're using are 3 ladies and 1 lovely. That is it. You're not going to play Ariana, with the simple reasoning that one of this deck's main advantages is that it literally doesn't care about 99% of non-engine that people use. That includes cards like Impermanence, Effect Veiler, Phantom of Yugioh, all that kind of stuff. Those are cards you don't want to be playing into, right? The game plan for this deck is to establish control over the board, establish 1 lady or lovely, and then just drive that advantage home. It sucks that you can't play amazing cards like Ariana, but you would just be playing into all of your opponent's non-engine. Think about it this way. If your opponent is playing a hand trap deck, the only hand trap that's good against this deck is Ash Blossom. If your opponent is playing a deck with like board breakers, evenly matched is good, but people haven't really been playing that much. Lightning Storm and Feather Duster are the only board breakers you really care about in the Tenpai deck, and there's answers for those as well. Raw Sphere Mode was the card that I chose as my main deck way to beat the yugioh deck going second, and also some other matchups when you go second, honestly. This card has been a double-edged sword for me, which obviously, right, like this card is amazing when you go second, and I've beat a bunch of yugioh players going second. The main reason why it needs to be this card over any other board breaker in this current format, Desiree and Varudras are incredibly difficult to deal with, because like Desiree has the ability to negate Dark Ruler even if you just go set 5. The Varudras having the non-target pop on another card when it negates 1 is like really hard to deal with. So while it's not impossible to beat the yugioh board with just set 5, it's so much easier if you draw the Sphere Mode. I did lose some games because I drew this card when I went first. It is the only card in my deck that only works when I go first, basically. So I was willing to take the risk, but it did come back to bite me. Like, for example, one of the Snake Eye games that I lost was because I drew double Sphere Mode in game 1. One of the Tenpai games that I lost, I opened a Sphere Mode and a Lovely, and then drew another Sphere Mode like 1 or 2 turns later. The reason why it's not Dimensional Shifter, by the way, which is what you see a lot of other lab decks play a lot of the time, is because 2 reasons. Dimension Shifter, first of all, does not work if you draw it as card number 6, or after sighting, you draw it off of Molcharmi Purulia. The other reason is that Sphere Mode actually exhausts your Yubel opponent's resources. If my opponent goes for the full combo with the Yubel deck, which they always get to do because I don't play any hand traps, and then I Sphere Mode them, that'll take a significant hit to their resource game, to their extra deck options, all that kind of stuff. Those cards will be gone. Whereas if I shifter them and they just pass, my deck doesn't really punish that. I'll just go like set 4 or 5 and pass back to them, and then they start playing into it with all their options still available. That's why I chose Sphere Mode over Shifter. I do think that decision is fine, but if you want the deck to be even better going first, you could swap the Sphere Modes for Shift, and that is legitimately all the monsters. 7. For the spell cards, you guys know I can't enter a tournament without my friends, the Runics. The reason why these are here, and the reason why it's these 3 specifically, I wanted some protection from Lightning Storm and Feather Duster in game 1, because that is the only way, realistically, unless you're going to draw multiple Sphere Modes, how you can lose the 10 pie matchup is if they have Lightning Storm or Feather Duster. After side decking, we have a lot of answers to Feather Duster and Lightning Storm. Overall, across all 3 games, it's no problem, but I just didn't want to get blown out by those cards all the time in game 1. The main usage of these cards is just to summon Hugin to protect. I didn't want to run the same one just in case you draw multiples, right? If the main purpose is to just summon Hugin, they might as well be any of them. So I picked these 3 because they are just the best ones, and all 3 of them allow you to bait Omni Negates from either Varudras or Desiree, right? Because this one you can just target the Varudras to try and negate it. This one can target the equip spell on the Desiree. This one can out like Caesar or Varudras as well. That's why I chose these 3 specifically. I did play 2 Pot of Dualities and 1 Card of Demise. Pot of Duality is a consistency card, and I did really like the fact that I played it. My issue with Pot of Duality, if anyone knows what kind of deck you're playing and you're going second into Yubel, this is the only card in your deck that they can really use Desiree on or Varudras during your turn. So if at any point in the tournament people find out what I'm playing and are smart about it, they should always be negating this card. That's why I'm not super happy about having to play it in this deck, because like I said earlier with the monster lineup, you don't want to give them anything to negate with the Desiree on your turn. The Desiree is meant to be a dead card. You're meant to just set 5 and pass. I always cite this out when I go second, but for the game 1 consistency, where if I win the dice roll, I'm gonna go first anyways, and they won't have the Desiree yet, I wanted some amount of pots just to be able to find the key opening cards that I needed. Post side, going first, this card can find you like Lord of the Heavenly Prison, which feels like the best card in your deck, honestly. Part of the Demise is more so here for like turn 2 or 3. After you set a bunch of cards, you interact with their stuff, and then you like Demise to fill your hand back up. I activated Card of Demise 1 time over the entire weekend, and I drew 2 monsters with it, so that was not great. It's also a card that I sided out a lot, but I felt like the idea behind it was fine. It's just like whenever you don't have Sphere Mode and you want to grind with them by just setting 5 and then interacting with their board, you're gonna run out of cards, and then having a Card of Demise can win you those games. And that is everything that's not a trap. We're gonna have 3 big welcomes and 3 welcomes. In my opinion, Welcome Labyrinth is the better one of the 2 in this deck specifically, because this one, even if they do have Ash, you can get it back on a later turn. So this one will get you Engine eventually. If a big Welcome Labyrinth gets Ashed, that's it. It does have value in the graveyard, but it doesn't get you to your Engine, because the ideal scenario for this deck is to really just draw 1 Engine card, and like I said earlier, just drive that advantage home, right? Like you establish 1 lady on the board, and then that keeps rolling. You don't want to open a bunch of Engine cards. If you only draw 1, this one is, I think, technically the best one next to just hard drawing lady. It's the hardest ones to interact with, right? Like big welcome is easier to just ash and then call it a day. You play 3 Solemn Strikes because it's a phenomenal trap card. The cool thing about Solemn Strike is that it can either interrupt your opponent or it can protect your Welcome Labyrinths from Ash Blossom. So it can protect your Engine or stop your opponent from playing. Very strong card. 3 Trap Tricks. This card is both amazing in this deck, obviously, but it can also be awkward. You have to be very careful with Trap Trick because very often the card you want to fetch with it is Simultaneous Equation Cannons. Obviously, we're going to be playing the cannon. The payoff for this card is amazing. But the problem is, very often when you try to fetch the Simultaneous Equation Cannon, if you have Trap Trick, you have to do it relatively early, right? Because this is usually the card you want to start with, trying to get off a huge cannon, right? So like if you don't hard draw the cannon and you draw Trap Trick, it can be awkward. The main purpose, obviously, of the cannon is because like banishing your opponent's entire field is an incredible payoff, and we're dedicating our entire extra deck to that as well to be able to pull this off. This is the other card that can beat Yubel when you go second. In testing, it was genuinely very possible into Yubel, where if they make the full board, you set 5 cards, including the Equation Cannon, you would have to like force the Varudras, force the Desiree, and then cannon away everything. And because you've let them cook, the entire extra deck is like empty. Cannon can just win you the game from there if you have access to engine. The cool thing about that scenario is that it's your choice basically as the cannon player to interact with the Varudras and the Desiree in a way that makes the math work. That's where you gotta really think and calculate how you can make this card work. For example, let's say I have a freezing curses and I'm worried about the Varudras negating my Equation Cannon, right? Or the same can be said about Runic Destruction with the Desiree, right? If my opponent has sequence on the board still, and for the math to work out, I can start with Destruction to destroy the sequence, which takes 2 cards off of the entire board, or I can just activate the cannon, they negate with Desiree, and I chain the Destruction to it, so at the resolution of the Equation Cannon, the Destruction is still on the board and counts as 1 extra card. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, this card can be very confusing, I know, but like, you have a lot of control over how many cards stay on the board. As an example, I had one game against Snake Eyes. I had a Welcome Labyrinth. The math would only work out if there was 1 less card in total. So what I did was I activated Welcome Labyrinth, my opponent ashed it, and then I cannoned while my Welcome Labyrinth was still on the board, but they had just discarded ash for cost, so it didn't count anymore, and so the total number of cards went down by 1. Whereas had I waited and let the Welcome Labyrinth go to the graveyard and fully resolve the chain, it would have been 2 less cards and the Equation Cannon wouldn't have worked anymore. Knowing when to resolve and how to resolve this card is very, very key to this deck because the payoff is obviously amazing. You can take advantage of this sometimes where you trap trick for cannon, use it, and then they think, well, okay, now I can just play. They can do anything anymore. You can still activate like a freezing curses after or something. And then we've got 3 destructive Daruma Karmic Cannon. Obviously, this is another one of those cards that's just amazing. It's a little less powerful against Yubel than it is against Snake Eye because the Yubel deck has like less links in general. It has the ability to fuse with face downs into like more phantoms and stuff like that. It's still incredibly powerful because it also just baits Omni Negates, right? And this is another one of those cards where you can really mess with the card count or the simultaneous Equation Cannon. If you go second and they have made the Omni Negates, you can either like flip it immediately to force them to negate it, or you can also chain it to Desiree to make the equip spell fall off to manipulate the number of cards on the field that way. And then the rest is just a bunch of good stuff trap cards in pairs of 2, so you can't trap trick for them. 2 Ice Dragon's Prison. This card is amazing, in particular against the Fiendsmith engine, no matter if it's in Snake Eyes or in Chimera or in Yubel. The Fiendsmith engine has so much recycling going on that you can really struggle with the follow-up it creates, so this card is phenomenal. The only reason I'm not playing 3 is because it is hard once per turn, and I really am not trying to play too many of those trap cards. 2 D-Barriers, which honestly, this card was very good for me, not in a floodgatey sense that you are used to this card. Like, I know people hate D-Barrier for like completely shutting off certain decks from doing anything, but it really doesn't do this in this format, at least against most decks. Like, obviously against Tenpai, it's great to just call synchros, but like the main purpose of this card is once again, you just like cut off the Fiendsmith part of your opponent's deck. For example, if they're playing Yubel, like you cut them off of Fiendsmith stuff and Phantom, but they still have a lot of other pushes they can do. This card even has uses against Snake Eye, which is a very link focused deck, but if they commit to the Fiendsmith card, summon sequence, activate sequence effect, you call fusion, that's pretty nice. I just wanted all of these trap cards that I'm using in this spot to be cards that I can set when I go second, and I can just force Omni Negates. And it's once again another one of those cards where you can decide whether you want it on the field to count for the cannon, in which case you go cannon, they negate, you chain barrier, or if you want it off the field so that the cannon math works out, you just activate it first, call whichever one they haven't used yet, like Xyz or Fusion, and then cannon after, right? 2 Terrors of the Overroot, once again, it's just a card that messes with the board and the graveyard at the same time, similar to Ice Dragon's Prison. 2 Compulse, this was probably the worst trap in my deck, but I didn't really know what else to put. You could go to 3 Ice Dragon's Prison and 3 Barriers or something. I was trying to not play too many once per turn traps, so this card, I did side it out a decent amount. It's like fine. It's one of the easiest ways to, for example, set a Welcome Lab back to your field after it got ashed. Like just a turn later, you just like compulse something and get it back. Fine, but the weakest trap in my lineup. And then the last card is Skill Drain. I know. I hated that card. Honestly, I did not win a single game because of Skill Drain. I even lost games after I activated Skill Drain because like this card, it doesn't really take resources away from your opponent, and it doesn't really progress your own game plan that much. Like, it's a powerful card, don't get me wrong, but it's like not as good as it used used to be in other decks. I played it because I felt like I had to, but looking back at it, I honestly sometimes would have liked the more interactive trap in some spots. But yeah, that was the main deck. I don't know actually if any of these Labyrinth cards are still expensive, but I think it's quite budget friendly, honestly, and it has a really good win rate against Tenpai and Yubel, so you might want to check it out for that. The extra deck, you guys aren't going to find it very funny. I played Airneos for the level 7 for the fusions. I played every fusion level from 1 through 7, and then I played so just some cool rank 3s. I played Bahamut Shark to summon Abyss Trite, some of my favorites. I had a lot of fun the day before the YCS to just find some of the coolest rank 3, 4s, and 5s that I could think of from back in the day. The rank 6s, I didn't really find anything super cool, but these are just some of my favorite XCs from back in the day, so it was a lot of fun. Because legitimately, it doesn't even matter. The only thought I put into it, I didn't want them to be light or dark, so I'm not giving my opponents like infinite Bestial targets, right? Which of course with the Runics, you have no choice. You need to play light or darks here. Everything else, I just want it to be not light or dark. So whenever I'm doing those, my opponent has to Bestial their own cards in case it ever matters. But that was the only thing. Obviously, the Runics matter. And then this guy has a graveyard effect, which pops a monster if you banish him. So like that was relevant. The reason why I wanted to play 6 and 7, which I realized when going through some lists before the tournament, 6 and 7 were not super common. I felt like being able to hit, especially level 9 and 10, like this lets you hit level 10 when there's 13 cards around, and this lets you hit level 9 when there's 12 cards around. I found that very relevant in the face of Yubel, because there's a lot of level 9 and level 10 going on, right? Phantom of Yubel, Desiree, those are both 9. Varudras and the OG Yubel and stuff like that, those are 10. So I really wanted to be able to hit like 7-3-3 or 6-3-3 when there was 12 or 13 cards around to hit those, right? So that's why I chose to run these 2 cards over like 2 rank 7s or 2 rank 2s. That's basically all there is to it. I'm not going to go too much into the equation canon math by now. You guys should read the card if you're not familiar with it. Most of the people that I played against knew what was going on. It's not that crazy. If you can make the numbers work, you're going to banish the opponent's entire board, and making the numbers work out is surprisingly not that hard. For the side deck, Lord of the Heavenly Prison is my favorite card in this entire deck. I haven't lost a single game where I opened this card because it just lets you play so ignorant, right? Your stuff can't be destroyed. It's just a phenomenal card overall because it's both protection and engine and incredible pressure because it's 3000 attack. You open this card and 4 other trap cards, you basically always win the game because your opponent can't blow you out with Lightning Storm or Feather Duster. You activate a trap card, it comes out, it gets you big welcome for the next turn, you swing with it, you big welcome, you bounce it back to your hand, you can immediately bring it back out, you won the game. The only reason I'm not main decking this card is because when I go second, it is obviously a magnet to all sorts of negates and stuff like that, right? Like if my opponent has a Phantom of Yubel and I go second and I reveal Lord of the Heavenly Prison, it's a no-brainer for them to activate the Phantom of Yubel. It's the only thing that they can ever negate. So like I didn't want to main deck it. It really is such a powerful card. Even going second in some matchups, like for example in Chimera matchups, where one of the most annoying things when you go second is the fact that they can like Guardian Chimera you after setting 5. Same against Unchained. I played against Unchained one of the rounds, and like that deck can be really annoying because they set up Escape to pop 1 card and then float into Abominable Unchained and pop another card in your turn. You have Lord of the Heavenly Prison. They just can't do that. I played 3 Lava Golems to complement the Sphere modes. Going second, it's really like just draw one of those and then set 5 anyways against the Omni Negates. The reason why I main decked Sphere mode over Lava Golem is because I wasn't sure what was going to be more common in the Yubel deck, which Unchained trap they were ending on basically, right? Was it going to be the Abominable Chamber or was it going to be the Escape? If it's Escape, you really want Sphere mode so you contribute that extra Unchained monster next to the 2 Omni Negates. If they play the Reborn trap, technically Lava Golem is fine. Post side, you have both. And then I played 3 Mulch Armies to help me draw into my board breakers, my Lava Golems, my Sphere modes, and my Evenlies. I sided evenly against Yubel, even though I think if it's your only breaker, it does nothing, obviously, because they have Omni Negates. But legitimately, especially if you've played like a long game 1, a grindy game 1, the easiest way to make the match end quickly is to just draw Sphere mode or Lava Golem plus evenly. Just tribute the Omnis evenly away, right? And I did that a couple times because when you're already playing 3 Sphere mode, 3 Lava Golem, and 3 Mulch Armies as draw power, the chance to pair an evenly with one of those cards is not that bad. Genuinely. And then 3 Solemns. So like the side deck is honestly really simple. These 9 were going second into most matchups, and these 6 were going first into everything. Am I happy I played this deck? Yes. I think this deck was a good meta call, and once again, thank you to Pack for helping me prepare with this deck. Here's a few things I learned about this deck on this weekend. A lot of things that normally really frustrate you, but when you play this deck, they simply don't. Round 1, game 1, I get Shiftered and Molcharmied. Frame 1 of my tournament. And I sit there and I'm like, set 5 passed. Feeling really good about my opponent just hand looping themselves for 2 cards. And I'm just over here like, dude, I'm so happy I'm playing this deck. I went to time a single time in the entire tournament simply because this deck wins or loses very quick. Tenpai is the most fun matchup for this deck because they simply are not prepared for it. No matter if they're playing board breakers or hand traps, all of their non-engines suck against my deck. And it was so fun just watching them like struggle on what to do. I had someone go Shifter, Heat Wave, and then flip Anti-Spell on me. And I'm like, dude, set 5, go. They went first because they felt like they couldn't win going second. They had so many bad cards in their main deck that they had to take out, like rolls and imperms and stuff like that. They put in Heat Wave. They were like, because just in case you have an Ariana or something, it's so funny. And then they flipped Anti-Spell in case I had Pot of Duality or something, but I sided it out anyways. It was a lot of fun, honestly. This deck, I liked it. Literally the only frustrations I felt throughout the entire weekend was like opening Sphere Mode when I went first or drawing Lovely, right? Those were the 2 things. Most of my losses were due to that, right? But it's a calculated risk that you take. Overall, I'm very happy how the deck turned out. I hope it gives you a little bit of a different perspective on what you can do in this current format. Hope you enjoyed the list, even though I did not quite make it into the top 32. I got close, you know, a little bit more luck against my Snake Eye opponent in the last round. And it may have worked out, but that's okay. That's part of it. Yeah, I'm glad to be back. You know, had a little bit of a longer trip, but we'll be back to streaming. We'll be back to content creation very, very soon. Until then, see you next time. Bye-bye.